Welcome to session 39 of our weekly event series where we bring in experts to give you insight in what it's like to work in some of these roles in tech, in big tech, in growth stage technology companies, and the skills that are top of mind and that are prioritized today. As you can imagine, careers in tech are shifting quite frequently, and what employers are prioritizing now is different than what it was even a few years ago. And product management, which we're talking today about with Sean Jackson, who's director of product at Audible, is one of those roles that is quite interesting because you end up seeing a lot of people from non-traditional backgrounds landing opportunities in product. Today, we're talking about what it takes to position yourself if you have an entrepreneurial background for a product management role. Last night, I got off the phone with a speaker that we're going to have that is currently at a company called Etsy that's going to be later in August. She came from an operations background. So there is no one size fits all kind of background that is attractive to employers for product management roles. So we're going to dig into that today. Today's session is called From Product Focused Entrepreneur to Director of Product at Audible. And quick agenda here. Again, we're going to go through an introduction with Sean to hear a little bit about his background and trajectory of his career and dive into specifically how he leveraged his entrepreneurial background to get into product management. And then we're going to open it up to Q&A. It says here 6:50. This is going to be pushed way back up here. So hopefully by 6:30, we'll move to Q&A and we'll get to hear from you folks. If you have questions that come up as Sergey and I are talking, then please do unmute yourself, or I should say actually drop into the chat. But then if we're not talking, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. And for the new folks that are in the room, we did recently open up applications for our Technology Career Acceleration Program for people that are looking to land opportunities in tech, specifically for non-technical roles, and learn from some of the experts that you're seeing here on the screen. It's an 8-week acceleration program. We encourage you to apply by going to this link. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and Sergey, I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Vadim, for that introduction, and thank you for joining us, Sean, taking time out of your busy schedule here to talk with the folks in this room who are interested in learning about your career. And rather than do kind of a standard bio, I'd like to start off by understanding your trajectory a little bit here, because I know that even yesterday when you shared, when you mentioned on LinkedIn, when you were thinking about your career, you never really envisioned yourself as somebody that would get into product. Maybe that wasn't even something that was on your radar, so perhaps that's why you didn't envision it. But can you talk a little bit about kind of how you saw your career evolve kind of early on? Because just to kind of skip a little bit ahead, and maybe folks, if you took a look at Sean's bio, you know that he started off his career, he was an international relations major, started off as a Marine, which it took you to places like Afghanistan, Haiti, Philippines. And it's not uncommon for people to come out of the military and pursue leadership roles of some sort. So I'd love to understand a little bit more about what you learned during that time as a Marine that gave you some insight into how that you actually may be a leader someday, and gave you the confidence to understand that you'll actually maybe have some success in it, regardless of what you would pursue. So talk a little bit about back then, what your mind frame was and what you were thinking maybe you would do after the Marine.
Yeah, interesting. So I was kind of a military brat. Both my parents were in the Army. Not career, they were in for 4 and 6 years each just to pay for school. But I grew up with a ton of, military books scattered around my house and pictures of my dad and mom in uniform on the walls. And I always thought I was going to be in the military. I really wanted to serve in some capacity. I grew up right next to a Marine Corps base in Southern California as well, which probably didn't hurt. You could hear jets taking off at El Toro Air Base, and you could see the Marine helicopters out in the ocean. So it was kind of something that permeated my adolescence. I also, frankly, college is expensive, and my parents didn't put aside any money for me. So, when I was getting ready to go to college, I'm like, oh yeah, man, sticker shock is huge. And I also, frankly, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I think like many people, when you're 18, 19 years old, like, you don't know what you want to do for 20 years. Like I hadn't done anything. Like I thought I wanted to be a doctor because I watched Scrubs on TV. Like that was my only kind of touch point of something that seemed like a real job. So I went into the Marine Corps thinking I would be a Marine officer and do the Marine Corps for 25 years and retire and be a contractor or something, or maybe join the CIA if I was really cool, do like a Jack Ryan thing. And it was a good thing for me. I was young, I was dumb, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. The Marine Corps certainly does knock some sense into you. I think the other thing the military does for you is it gives you a lot of responsibility at a very young age. So I was 19 years old. I was a lance corporal in the Marine Corps, which is a pretty junior rank. And I was flown to Haiti to be one of 3 Marines to set up field hospitals that saw 8,000 people a day, right? And my job was to figure out where should the hospital go, who should get in to see the hospital, who shouldn't get in, how do you work with the local police to set up 8,000 people, literally tens of thousands of people over the course of a week. And we had this hospital set up, we're in line, like who gets to come in, how do you work with the local, I mean, a lot of stuff that typical 19-year-olds don't do. And so I think the Marine Corps just really forces you into situations where you have, and it's not like these are, I mean, I don't want to say that was like a life and death situation, but this was like for the people of Haiti, we came in there right after an earthquake, and you know, Port-au-Prince was in literally in rubble everywhere. And so like, this was serious stuff. And, you know, and it only got more serious as I started going to more conflict areas like Afghanistan. And so by the time I went to Afghanistan at 23, I was a sergeant. I was an operations chief for a team of 50 Marines spread out across the country. So, you know, I think the thing the military did for me is it forced me to work on really challenging problems that didn't have defined solutions early in my career. It taught me that you can solve problems. It also, you might not believe this because people don't think about this about the military, very interdisciplinary function. So when you're in Haiti setting up hospital clinics, you got to think about everything from like where are the bathrooms to security to how to like traffic flow to like, you know, like doctors need breaks. And so how are you going to incorporate that in there? Like all kinds of just like random stuff that 19-year-olds don't really think about when you're working at J. Crew or Baskin Robbins or wherever you typically work when you're 19. So I think it just forces you to mature quickly. And then in terms of leadership, I mean, I came out of the Marine Corps at 24. I had been a manager, like to use, you know, civilian language since I was 22. Like I had literally led Marines in battle. I had been on patrols in Afghanistan where we got shot at. Like, so the challenges of leadership that I think you face in the civilian sector, well, non-trivial, like I'm not saying it's easy, but like, it just didn't seem like that big of a deal to be managing a team to build an app where it's like, okay, yeah, whatever. Like I've been shot at, like I've, you know, helped set up, I've rebuilt villages in the Arctic Circle, and not in like a I'm better than everyone way, but like these problems, I solved those problems and I can solve these problems too. I think a lot of what it takes to be an entrepreneur and also to someone in technology today is a realization that like humans can solve problems, right? Like every organization on this planet was built by some group of humans. That nature didn't create organizations, humans make them. And so, you know, we can change our environment and we can solve problems. It just is a question of like thinking through how to do that. And it's not always easy. And sometimes you don't, sometimes you fail. And that I had certainly saw my share of failure in Afghanistan. I mean, I was in Afghanistan in 2012. Guess what? We're leaving now, and it wasn't exactly solved. So I saw my share of failure, and that failure was earned in blood and treasure. You know, it wasn't, you know, it was in some ways much more real than the failure you face in a tech organization.
Yeah. So that makes it super clear where you got the confidence, obviously, just because you were thrown into it and you had to figure things out. But, you know, I'm curious. I mean, for a lot of people, especially coming out of the military, figuring out what their civilian life is going to look like, especially, you know, given that you saw how real these challenges were, and trying to figure out how you're going to apply that to new life is a challenge. So what did you do when you decided to, you know, get into the professional world and start a career? How did you approach that?
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned this in my LinkedIn post too. Like, I'm very lucky in that I had a couple of organizations that really helped me out, and I think that one of the best things you can do if you're the world today has lots of clubs and organizations and groups that you can join either for money or for time or for some other thing. And so I joined an organization called Venture for America. I frankly didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I didn't want to do the military anymore. It was too bureaucratic for me. I had ideas that I wanted to see executed, but because of the constraints of the organization, I wasn't able to realize those. And that wasn't a knock on the organization. I just wanted to move more faster and be more nimble. And so I kind of overcorrected, and I'm like, hey, like, what's the opposite of, you know, a 240,000 person bureaucratic organization that's 250 years old, which is the U.S. Marine Corps? Okay, startups, like that have been around for 3 months and like probably won't exist for 2 years, right? That's kind of like the polar opposite end of the spectrum. And I found a program. I looked for a lot of different programs that would get me into startups. I mean, I did everything from Venture for America. I started looking at Udacity courses and like mocks that kind of focused on entrepreneurship, started reading books on entrepreneurship, and just tried to immerse myself in it. I was super fortunate in that I got into Venture for America, which was very helpful to my career, because at Venture for America, for those of you who don't know, it's like a boot camp for 2 years, essentially, that teaches you how to start a company. But I do think that even if I hadn't joined that particular program, I would have joined some other program that would have helped me kind of along the path. And I think it's really, there's so many resources today. Like, don't try to do it yourself. Like, go look for resources that can help you understand and plow that. And like, people have done this before, like, go learn from them. I don't use your own skills and experience, obviously, but like, you know, you don't have to like reinvent the wheel in some ways.
Totally agree. There's a lot out there, and there's a lot of people who want to help you. That being said, though, even I mean, I think what year fellow were you? 2015, is it?
13.
No,
Yeah,
2013. 2013.
Yep.
So you were one of the So you were one of the first years. So the organization was still relatively small, probably around maybe 100, 150 fellows total, maybe at most, right?
60 fellows per class at that time. So I think there was like 125 fellows when I joined.
Yeah.
Total.
So, that's still 120 people, 120 ambitious people who are trying to make a mark, who are trying to create something out of nothing, get leadership opportunities. So what did you do during maybe that first year, even in that fellowship, to stand out, so to speak, to try to get some opportunities to have an impact?
Yeah, I mean, so the way the program works is you get a job too. So I had a full-time job. My job was working for a local rich person here in Detroit who was trying to do a lot of different stuff. And I think what I really tried to do was just volunteer for everything. Just because I wanted experience and I wasn't, afraid. The only commodity I had was I could have a good attitude. I would work hard. And I would be persistent. And so I didn't know anything about tech. I had a degree in political science and I had experienced shooting a machine gun, right? So not super useful skills in a tech organization in Detroit. But it turns out that if you can show up with a good attitude and put the work in, that's what people expect for someone early in their career. They don't really need a lot else. And frankly, that'll get you a long way, even if you are senior in your career. Actually, I think oftentimes as you get more senior, people become less of those qualities. So just really try to do that. I mean, I think it's one part persistence, one part luck, obviously I was very lucky in that I joined Venture for America and I worked for a really rich billionaire in Detroit who was working on a lot of projects, but I also really tried to volunteer and raise my hand for everything, especially things that were aligned with my career interests. So whenever I heard about a tech project that might get started, I would be like, hey, can I take notes in this meeting? Can I be the person to be on the whiteboard? Just try to weasel my way into those conversations so that I could be at the table and be surrounded by people. The other thing I tried to do was surround, and this was easy through Venture for America, but surround myself with friends and peers who are also interested in improving themselves. I think one of the sayings that somewhat trite, but I think is true, is you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so it's really, I would encourage you to that's something you can control. You can control who you spend your time with. And so try to find a peer group that's interested in improvement and hopefully self-improvement in a similar direction to you, so that you can kind of mutually reinforce yourself. You can have accountability buddies to kind of, force you to do stuff. And also if all of your peers are entrepreneurial people, for fun, you're going to go to conferences. For fun, you're going to watch, you're going to stay up and watch a tech talk or something like that. And so that's going to help you better yourself and you'll legitimately enjoy it. I think the other thing that I've been really surprised by humans is humans have an amazing capacity for change. And so if you expose yourself to something a lot, you will eventually start enjoying it, right? How many people liked beer the first time they had it? No one, right? But we all drink beer now. Same is true for tech, same is true for products, same is true for any of these new things. When it's hard at first and it doesn't make sense, but you'll learn to enjoy it hopefully, not every part of it, by the way, but overall, you'll start being oh, I like reading TechCrunch articles. This is fun. It stops being work at some point, or at least it did for me.
Yeah, no, that totally resonates. It's also the more you find out about your own talents and the better you get at things, the more you enjoy doing them, I think, as well. I'm curious, and part of this conversation, of course, is how you went from being an entrepreneur to then becoming a product leader. So, and for any entrepreneur, especially when you're starting your first company or your first couple of companies, you figure out what your sort of focus is. And for some people, they're a little bit more product leaning naturally. For some people, they're a little bit more business development, sales leaning, some are more marketing leaning, whatever it might be. Can you talk a little bit about your first entrepreneurial venture and how you found your specialty?
Yeah, so I was kind of lucky in that my first entrepreneurial venture was kind of a quasi entrepreneurial venture, and then I started a nonprofit here in Detroit that was a civic tech project. So it was really interesting because I had to build all the technology, had to do all the sales and kind of get it. So the project, to give some people some context, is the city of Detroit was in bankruptcy. There's a big challenge around blight and blighted buildings in Detroit. No one knew how many blighted buildings there were, who owned them, where they were located. They knew they existed, but if you said show me all the blighted buildings on this street, no one knew the answer. And so I was hey, that's an app, we can solve that. And so I started a nonprofit called Motor City Mapping that built a public-private partnership application to give the city of Detroit and residents of Detroit tools to understand blight and vacancy across the city of Detroit. And this was really nice because it was kind of startup on training wheels, because you got still to build the technology, still had to build a consumer-facing product, still had to build for users in the city of Detroit. but and we still had to raise money because this was founded by philanthropy. But in some ways, the scope was limited, and it was like there is success for companies. There's no success, right? Google just continues on indefinitely until, like all organizations, probably one day, maybe 1,000 years from now, maybe 20 years from now, it will die. But startups kind of have, especially these kind of like purpose-built nonprofits, have like a defined life cycle end, which is like, we are going to build this inventory of lighted property in Detroit, and we're going to give it to the city, and we're going to be done. So it was great. And if you can, I really think that, because I learned a lot. I learned all the things all the mistakes you make about over-investing in tech and over-hiring and all of that I learned, but I learned it in a vehicle that I knew was going to be over in 2 years. And so while I cared about the outcome, it was also like the mistakes I made along the way in some ways I could wash my hands from. And I didn't realize that when I was building it, but looking back, that was super valuable. It's another reason I really encourage other entrepreneurs who are thinking about entrepreneurship to work on side projects, even if they're not things that they think are going to be like their ultimate passion and they're going to be like the mega business you start. Starting something, like just start a Kickstarter, like, you know, start a lemonade stand. I hate to say it, but like anything will give you skill sets that will be so helpful when you start your real quote unquote business. Also, you have no idea what will turn into your real business, right? Some people start businesses and they don't think it's going to be big, and all of a sudden they quit their job and they're raising money faster than they ever thought would happen. So anyway, so that was kind of like my first entrepreneurial experience. And then from there, I had all the tools. And then also it's like everything, it's like, it's less scary the second time. I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, there's this fear of like, should I quit my day job? Like, am I going to be able to do this? Can I start an organization? Well, I already started an organization. I already gone through the legal paperwork of starting a nonprofit. I already raised money from philanthropy. And so the idea of kind of taking that leap to start another company, I felt like I had confidence and I could do it, and I had already done it in a way. So I didn't feel like the fear of like failure that I think so many people experience, rightly so. I mean, it's a scary thing to do, but I had already kind of done it, so it wasn't as nerve-wracking for me the second time. It's also why I see a lot of serial entrepreneurs, right? Like, it's also a skill set. Like, you learn, yes, of course, like nonprofit civic data maps are different than employee directories, which I worked on later, and that's different than Audible and other things I've worked on. But some of the core skills are very, very transferable. And in like starting up, understanding, assessing a market, kind of building an MVP of the product, all those things I think translate not one-to-one, but like certainly over 80% overlap, at least in my experience.
Yeah, and you know that's the nice thing about entrepreneurship, and it can be overwhelming for some people, but also for others, it's a huge benefit that you do get to develop a lot of different skills, and you can choose which muscle you want to work on more, so to speak. And so let's talk about that, the employee directory company here a little bit, the company Sift that you started, because by then, you know, you had a couple at bats, you worked on a couple other projects and businesses and ventures, and this was another one that you were starting with more of a team right away. And so can you tell me a little bit more, kind of now that you have the benefit of hindsight, now that you're in this product leadership role, talk a little bit about the skills that you think you developed during that venture that you think really transferred well and are serving you well in the role that you have now.
Yeah, I think the single biggest skill set that transfers is like, product is solving problems for your users. And as an early stage entrepreneur, like that's what you're trying to figure out too. You're trying to figure out like, what problem can I solve for people and like in some ways this is both the same, where it's like, I'm trying to solve a problem and I solve your problem and you give me money. That's a startup. That's also a product, right? Like, product role is to figure out, okay, hey, like what problem do you have? And maybe it's not money, maybe it's attention, maybe it's time, maybe it's, you know, maybe it's a little bit more complicated. Maybe it's a two-sided market or something like that. But that's really what it comes down to. And to me, at the early stage, like when you're starting a company, like that's what everyone should be focused on, in my opinion, is that product market fit you hear all about. Is like, is what I'm building, what is the pain point from the market? What are people saying again and again? How are they doing this today? And how can I deliver a solution that's way better than the current way of doing things? And that ability to talk to a stakeholder that's an expert in this thing, presumably, that has a lot of pain around this, and you probably don't have as much pain, and be able to kind of distill their major challenges and then be able to translate those major challenges into a workable solution that can then help them and solve that challenge for them in a way that that they'll pay you money for. That's, I mean, I think that's product. That's all product is. And so learning, and that's not easy, right? Because I mean, if Henry Ford asked people what they want, they're going to say faster horses. Like, people don't have the language to understand, like they can't often describe what their actual problem is. Like, we're humans are very bad at actually describing what our problems are. And then also being able to translate, well, even if you can identify that problem, being able to translate the right sized solution that's not too big, not too small, and then like is the right price. Like that's a lot. So that's a lot to do. But I think that process of doing it in an early stage creates kind of more of an urgency. And also, like, not everybody does this, but you have to talk to your customers more. Now that I'm at an organization like Audible, it's a lot larger, and so it's a lot more challenging to talk to your users. When I was at a startup, I literally just spent the first 6 months of our life, as a company, just talking to people who had the problem, and like that was our entire company. So we had a very clear shared vision of what the problems our users or our potential customers and users were facing. The bigger you get, the less you can have those conversations. The problem is still just as urgent, but now you have to like not only translate those like problems for like your team, you have to kind of be the ambassador of those problems across the organization. So like the more you can kind of learn to tell your users problems in a coherent story, the better. And that's what early stage companies are.
So, you mentioned this really core and very important skill set for any product person, which is interviewing customers and translating those insights into product decisions. Every product person needs to know how to do that. And like you said, it's not an easy skill to develop. So how do you get good at that? And, when you're talking to somebody, let's say you were hiring somebody for your team at Audible and they came from an entrepreneurial background, how do you assess that that's something that they're good at? Because a lot of people can say, I have a lot of empathy for customers and I know how to talk to customers. So how do you assess that? How do you develop that skill set as an entrepreneur yourself in that situation?
Yeah, I think that how you develop it and how you assess it are pretty different challenges. Hiring is its own nightmare and impossible thing to do. But I think in terms of developing the skill set is much easier. You do it, right? You do it a lot. You have a lot of conversations. You force yourself to get yourself out there in the market, have a large number of conversations. You learn how to quickly build rapport with someone. You learn how to kind of like, some of it is kind of just like, I don't know how to describe it other than just like my advice to any entrepreneur whenever I hear they have an idea, I'm like, cool, go talk to 100 people and confirm that they like, see if they like, without talking about your idea, see if they have a problem that your idea would solve. Like that is kind of the, I think a very, very good test. And I think many people start companies without ever doing that. And many people, frankly, raise lots of money without ever having done that. And that's why you see a lot of companies come out of YC and they great ideas, super smart people, really sexy looking products that can't get traction because they never actually confirmed that people really have the problem that they're spending their lives trying to solve, which is very silly in retrospect because you can just talk to people, right? It doesn't cost a lot of money to talk to 100 customers really. And if you can't talk to 100 customers, how are you going to build a business? Like, you got to talk to customers to build a business. So kind of fundamental. I think you can also, there are a lot of, again, open source, there are a lot of open source resources out there. I'm a big fan of the Jobs to be Done framework that talks specifically about the job story. And there's an entire framework focused on how people kind of, when they understand they have a problem, when they start seeking a solution to the problem, how they evaluate different types of solutions. So that idea of customer interviewing, like, I mean, I would just say like, yeah, start there. And there's not just one methodology for this, there are many. Just like any methodology, sales methodologies, product development methodologies, agile project management methodologies, like pick your poison, right? They probably all have some valid points. I'm not a zealot to any one particular framework, but I started with Jobs. It was very helpful for me. Jobs to be Done, was it JT, BT? I never have said it out loud. I just call it Jobs. I think that's where I started. And then from there, kind of just like multiply that with time. Iterations, I mean, like do that a lot and you'll see what's working and what's not.
Mm-hmm. So if you were to give some advice for somebody that is really interested in a career in product and they're just starting off, maybe they don't have their own business, so that it's a little bit harder for them to get that skill set and get those 100 conversations. What would you say they should focus their time on? I think getting familiar with some of these frameworks and understanding how to interview customers is a really solid thing to do. What else do you think would be important for them to spend their time on?
Yeah, I think it's like an interesting combination of like being able to take the problems in the market. So going out, like figuring out how do you learn if something's a problem, and then how do you tell other people about it? I think the other thing that product people really need to do, especially I'm now learning in large organizations, in some ways in small organizations it's just easier, is to be the evangelist. Like you need to really understand the customer's pain and you need to make sure that everyone else in the organization understands it too. And like in a startup, everybody, I think it was actually much easier because everyone understands the customer to a much higher degree in a startup just because they're closer to the customer by virtue of how big the organization is. Like if you have 100 customers and 10 employees, like every employee is so close to they know what the pains are, they hear about them. If you're at, Audible, 1,500 person company, you could go weeks without like the legal team. How often do they actually understand what customer problems are? Like they're great people and they're trying really hard, but they're so far away from those problems that like it really is the product person's job is to make those problems real and help other stakeholders who, by the way, all have different ways of understanding things, understand why is this the thing that we need to do to move the business in the direction. Sometimes some stakeholders need that through numbers. So as a product person, you need to kind of learn how to tell the story through numbers and be able to use data and metrics. Some people need technology, like they need to sometimes people need to see a design, they need to see it and believe it. So I think that kind of the second thing is really honing your multifaceted storytelling abilities so that you can kind of seamlessly weave narrative, data, and technical specs and design together to kind of convince and move people to your way of thinking, that kind of persuasion. It's important in any role, right? But I think it's especially important for a product manager. In some ways, you don't think about this, but when you actually become a product person, you have to sell your vision to your own company. People aren't just gonna be like, oh, you're in product, we'll do whatever you say. Like, no, quite the opposite. They're gonna tell you, what do you know? I know better. Like you in some ways you have the responsibility to kind of convince everyone to do your job, right? You've done the work to do this, you have to kind of prove it.
Yes, and that takes time to develop that skill set and the confidence to be good at that. And obviously as a leader trying to build a product, that's something that you have to do internally with your company because you're trying to get everybody behind a vision. But I'm curious because even in a small startup, let's say you have a team of 5 or 10 people, you're getting a lot of inputs. You're getting a lot of inputs and advice and thoughts from different customers. I know that you scaled your product Sift to thousands, if not tens of thousands of people using the product. And so I'm sure you constantly had people telling you the product should do this, should do that. How did you learn how to take all those different inputs and translate them to a singular vision or to a series of features that you thought were going to have a real impact?
Yeah, and this is where I think that like having a clear understanding of what problem you're solving is actually really, really important for every company. And I think it's as much of a problem at an early stage as it is at a later stage. So you need to have a raise, and it can change, but it needs to be super focused. Like, what specifically are we solving and for who? And that needs to be core, and you need to have that clear in your head. You need to have a reason why that's the problem you're solving, and that needs to be communicated to everyone in your organization. Because one of the things I like to say to people is with technology, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. So resources are by definition scarce. I don't care whether you're at Audible, whether you're at Google, whether you're at a 4-person startup, your resources are constrained, and time is always, and effort is always the thing you have to. So it's like, what is the most important thing you could do? What can you do next that's going to move the needle? And move the needle on what is the question then? And so I think to me, so at Sift, it was, okay, understanding Sift employee directory. Cool, okay, who's this employee directory for? And frankly, we took way too long to figure this out. Like, we at first were like, oh, we want to be an employee directory for everyone. We want it to be 50-person companies, for 10,000-person companies. It probably took me 2.5 years of being an idiot and saying like, we're going to be for everyone, before I was like, nope, like we're for the enterprise. We're for enterprise B2B companies that have, more than 5,000 employees that are on Workday or ADP using Microsoft Office suite with a tech workforce, right? Like, get as specific as possible. And what are we going to solve for them? We're going to solve the ability for their employees to find the right internal person to solve a problem when it comes up that's not clear. So like getting super specific, and even that's like relatively vague, but like now you can kind of target in very specifically. And if you start getting feedback from someone that isn't about that core value proposition, you can kind of be like, is this something that you always want to listen, because you never know, companies pivot all the time, right? So you want to always be listening to the market, but you can kind of always put it through the filter of like, is this really going to move the needle on the thing we need to do the most? Like, is this really a feature that's the enterprise is going to care about? Is our target market going to care about it? We got a lot of people who wanted Slack integration, and we had already decided, no, like we're not going to do Slack because the type of companies that purchase Slack are smaller. And so smaller companies, we won't pay for an employee directory, even if they want it. They'll stick on the free version forever. And so it was really easy to kind of discard any Slack integration point of feedback, not as invalid, but just as like, that's valid for a customer that we're not going after. So I think, and then the real challenge for you as a leader is to make sure that that vision isn't just in your head, because if you have to be the throttle or the kind of input for every piece of feedback that comes in, and you have to be the person that kind of says yes or no, you're going to die, because you're just going to have a bazillion questions to answer every day. We need to make sure that everyone shares that universal vision in your organization, so that an intern who's been on the job a month can be able to look at that and be like, yeah, that's not a feature that we would do because it doesn't match our goal as a company. It doesn't match our strategic objectives. And I think, to me, the strategic objectives should be really like they should be a way to kind of cleave off all the stuff that it doesn't matter, and really help your team focus on, okay, what does matter? And that it should be clarifying, so that like if you're on vacation or if you get hit by a bus, they can still operate and understand what's important, even if you're not there. And I think many startups, that's like kind of the founder magic is like, oh, the founder always knows what to do. I think the founder did a bad job then, because the founder's job in some ways is just to like hire people smarter than you and then give them the resources they need to do their job, and then align on the vision, right? Just make sure that vision is really clear. So if you hired smart people and you raised money, but you didn't align them on the vision to help them operate independently, I don't think you're a really good founder, or you're not as good as you could be potentially, because you're leaving a lot of resources on the table because your people are going to be paralyzed without you making every decision, which I don't know about y'all, but I have a daughter. Like, I want to go to soccer practice sometimes. Like, I want to go ride my bike. I want to go for a run. I don't want to constantly be checking Slacks and emails.
Yeah. And, and I think that kind of entrepreneurial discipline that you need to be able to make these decisions in a way that's clear-headed takes time to develop, and it takes time to learn about your market. It takes time to learn about your product, what's economically viable for your business, and what can the market bear now versus what it'll bear in the future. That takes time to learn, and so I'm not surprised it took you a couple of years to really figure it out with that business. But I want to shift the conversation now to your current role. And by the way, folks, we have another maybe 20 minutes or so left here in the conversation, and so go ahead and click on raise your hand if you want to ask Sean a question directly, and we will let you do so. But I'm going to kick this off here while people are thinking of their questions. And I'm curious, you were building businesses, you were an entrepreneurial leader, a CEO, and now you are director of product. So how did that decision come about? Did you already decide that you want to be a product leader? That's kind of the hat that you want to wear and the work that you want to do for an organization?
Yeah, I mean, great question. To me, I've always been, as you can kind of tell from my like early career jumping, like I'm one who quickly understood early in life that the grass is always greener on the other side. And so I think when you're at a startup, you think that big tech is better, and when you're a big tech, you think a startup is better. And like the reality is they're just different. I feel like at Sift, so I grew Sift from a nothing person company to $1 million of annual recurring revenue business. But frankly, I reached a plateau where it was like I couldn't figure out how to take the business to the next level. I worked with our board, and we, after a lot of hard decisions, brought in a new CEO who had kind of more experience on the enterprise sales side. And frankly, as we were doing more and more, as the problems of the business became more and more enterprise sales problems and less product problems, like the product was great. Like we had a high NPS score, people loved it. It was more about how do you do the jujitsu to get onto the budget cycle for, a Fortune 1000 company to purchase software. Like, frankly, that just wasn't what lit my fire and made me excited. And so after kind of helping transition to the new CEO of that business, I kind of thought, what do I want to do? And one of the things I realized is my product experience was, I love product. I love building stuff. I love talking to customers and realizing the vision and kind of working with the tech team to kind of make that a reality. But my experiences both at Motor City Mapping and at Sift had been really limited to, Sift, we got up to about 100,000 end users at the end of the day, which is I'm pretty proud of. But it's still like the scale was not to the place where we weren't really using data to make decisions. Like it was more kind of like gut and then check to see if it was wrong. We weren't using kind of predictive analytics. So I wanted to do two things. I wanted to work in the consumer space. I wanted to be able to work something that's directly B2C, not B2B. And then I wanted to work where I had the scale of impact was larger, and I wanted to work with more data. And so for me, that meant, I don't know if it's forever, but for this period of my life, I'm like, the next thing I want to do is be able to kind of understand impact at scale. And so I started looking for opportunities more in like the FANG universe of, Facebook and their ilk. Mostly so I could have that experience of hitting something at scale, because I kind of had already been in startup land. You hear a lot of like 0 to 1, 1 to 10, and this is in terms of customers, right? So I had kind of done the 0 to 1 a couple times. I had done the 1 to 10. I hadn't quite cracked the 10 to 100, but I realized that wasn't something I was passionate about solving, especially in the enterprise space. It's a very important part of the business, but not something that I was like wanted to dedicate the next 30 years of my life to mastering. And so I'm like, okay, cool. Like, what do you do when you're at 1 million and you're trying to go to 10 million? What if you're at 10 million, you're trying to go to 100 million? Like, how do you build a product that can do that? I was really interested in that aspect of it. And then frankly, also, I think one of the things that happens in your life is like, there's other things that happen. Like when I started my last few companies, I was a single dude who didn't really have anything else going on. And so working 80 hours a week wasn't a big deal to me. And I had been in the military before that. So I literally spent 12 months working in Afghanistan without really a break to speak of. And so like my work ethic was high. Now I have a daughter, I have, you know, a partner, I have other priorities that frankly make it more challenging to have an entrepreneurial lifestyle. And so again, it's not forever, but yeah, I want to spend time with my daughter while she's really young and formative and be able to be her soccer coach. I'm sure when she's 13, she won't want to hang out with me at all. Maybe I'll focus back on starting another company then. But for this stage of my life, I wanted to have some of that work-life balance, and that, again, I think you can do that at startups, but it's not as easy. And that combined with my other personal goals around building my skill set around data really led me to kind of a bigger tech company.
That's great. Thanks for that context, Sean. All right, we have a question here from Zach Rubin. Zach, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sean. First and foremost, thank you for your service. And I was curious, how have your leadership skills and tactics developed over time as being a founder at the various companies that you ran, and now to being the director of product marketing or product management at Audible?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think like many people, I've had a lot of bosses, many bad in my experience, and I've learned through negative examples. So what do I not want to be? And I think it's good, frankly, to have bad bosses as a young person, because you can kind of very easily fall into the habits, and you can kind of look in the mirror and be like, am I being like that jerk that I had? And being in the military just heightens that, because there's a lot of really bad leaders in the military because you have authority. And so you don't need to be good. You can just be, your rank gives you the right to be right, even if you're wrong. My leadership style has always been the servant leader. Actually, the Marine Corps really promotes this. Like, you may not realize this, but in the Marine Corps, like, they really believe that the 19-year-old rifleman private is the most important person in the entire service, and they really try to, everything the military does, at least the Marine Corps does, is try to help that frontline rifleman do their job better. And so there's this whole idea of like the org chart is very much like that rifleman who's out there alone and afraid in the dark, in the cold. Like, how can we help that person do their job best? And that mentality I think is a great way of working. Even if you're a founder, I think there's a lot of, especially with all like Silicon Valley and TechCrunch, like there's this, I've seen much, and it's also, I think the Midwest helps with this, but like there's a lot of, founder godhood, founder kind of idol worship. And I think that's very silly. I really tried to be, again, like my engineers are smarter than me. My marketing people know more about marketing. My salespeople know more about sales. Like, I just was the person who happened to have an idea of what we should be doing. And I was like, more like a prime minister, like first among equals, of like, hey, my job is to align everyone behind a single vision and make sure everyone understands that vision, and then to give you the resources to make that vision happen, and to frankly get out of your way as much as possible. I say that. Do I do that all the time? I hope so. I hope I do that, 80+% of the time. I'm sure there have been times where people who work for me would be like, but Sean, that one time you mandated this, and you got to kind of, sometimes you have stuff that you believe in and you can pull rank as founder to make it happen. But I think the good founders don't do that very often. There's for every job that does that and succeeds, I think there's probably 100 companies that fail miserably because they don't leverage the skill sets of their people and the knowledge of their people. And so it's why I like, not to, like, obviously he's dead now, so I don't like, not to disperse the dead, but like people like him and Elon Musk and to some extent Bezos, like, it seems to be that leadership style. I don't think that leads to the healthiest and best companies. I'm more of a fan of like a Stuart Butterfield from Slack style of kind of more softer leadership and more thought leadership, and letting your people show you their superpowers and hopefully empower them to be better than you ever could be.
Great. Thank you. Chris Wren, your question next. Go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, also thank you so much for coming here. Your story and everything is super, super interesting. I guess my question is about like, for people trying to break into PM, like, I guess what sorts of like qualities make you super, super passionate about like a new candidate that like comes across that you come across, like specifically stuff that I guess like is less of like the basic requirements that are expected, but more something rare that makes you super, super passionate about onboarding that person?
Yeah, step one, amazing quality mic. I need to get a mic that good of quality for webinars and stuff. Very cool. You can definitely hear it. Two, I mean, yeah, I think it's, I mean, I am very biased. So like, I don't know if this advice would work. And frankly, it's interesting because like, I think product hiring is becoming very formalized in the same way that engineering hiring has become formalized, in a way that I think has good intentions behind it, but I think makes the process a little perverted in like the true sense of the word, in that like the outcomes they're seeking are, so like you can go to like pmexercises.com and like all these questions, and it almost gamifies the whole process. So to me, what I really want to see is I want to see curiosity, like earnest curiosity in a candidate. And you can't really see that from a resume so much. I like it when a candidate has like a really interesting kind of mission statement or cover letter where they're like, oh, like, hey, I'm really interested in, like I've been studying AI, the impact of AI on text readers for the past 20 years, and like has like a kind of either like a super clear, like they're super interested in something, or they've kind of meandered through life and it's like, oh yeah, I was like a volunteer fireman and then I became a salesperson and now I taught myself to code, like that curiosity, I think leads you to be a really good PM because you need to be curious and like you don't have the answers. Like PMs are not smarter than anyone else. Their job is to take and to like oversimplify it. Their job is to like listen to people who have problems and then create specs for engineers to build solutions. Like there's actually very little personal intelligence needed to do that well. You need a lot of emotional intelligence. You need to be able to kind of understand and distill what's important, but you don't need to be like a rocket scientist at math or have a crazy high GMAT score to make that happen, in my opinion. So that's what I look for. I look for more interesting, kind of unique backgrounds. I will say, like, frankly, as someone who just tried to get a job in product, not every person I interviewed with saw that, especially people from big tech. Like I think they like to see someone who's like a software engineering background for some reason, even though I had to do all kinds of software engineering assessments as part of my job. I have not written a line of code. I don't even have access to our code base. Like I'm barely in Jira, frankly, in my job. So it's kind of funny how much pressure they put on that, considering how little of that is important for your role. But I wouldn't sweat it too much. So if you're applying for PM roles and you're getting rejected because you don't have that background, whatever. Like don't take that raw. Like you're just not gonna. You probably wouldn't want to work for that leader anyway because they wouldn't respect the things that you have. I think it's much more important in a PM role to get a great fit where like your leader, the person you're working for, really understands your superpowers and wants to use you, even if it's not as sexy as a company, sexy quote unquote. Because like that's going to get you the experience to be able to do your job really well. And frankly, I would say, I mean, I'm happy I landed at Audible. I love Audible. I've been an Audible listener for like 8 years. And so like, I truly love this particular application. But the other companies I was looking for, originally I was looking at like Facebook and stuff, as I said earlier, but I actually ended up like looking at a lot of like weird, like med tech companies doing like super specific stuff in like more niche areas for product roles. Because step one, they were more flexible in terms of who they were going to accept as a product management candidate for people who have non-traditional backgrounds. And frankly, the companies were more, I don't want to say interesting, but like they were truly solving problems in a way that I thought was more organic, for lack of a better word. It wasn't like they were forcing like you use this one product process and you have to do it this way. And like, that's the way we do things here. It's like, well, I mean, there's some stuff to learn from those great product processes, certainly. But I don't think that like the best outcomes come from following a super rigid process in product. So I don't know if that's helpful, but
yeah, that was super helpful. Thank you so much.
Can you walk us through your day-to-day as a director of product management? What type of projects you're working on right now? I'm not sure how much I'm supposed to talk about what like I'm specifically working on. Probably not. It's interesting now being an Audible. Like I'm like, am I even supposed to be here? I didn't really talk to my PR person about this, so hopefully this doesn't go viral. But PR person, if you're hearing this is not an admission of guilt. Yeah, so I think in general at larger tech companies, the big difference between me and smaller tech companies is there's just so much more going on. So I still have specific mandates, right? So we have challenges we're looking at from a 3-year perspective, then we kind of break that down into like, well, what are we trying to do this year related to growth or customer experience or some metric. And it's very metric driven, which is new for startups. It's kind of like, yes, there's a metric, but it's kind of like customers. It's very kind of like just grow, and like however you grow kind of is unimportant. And I think at a big company like Audible, it's like much more specific. Like, hey, we're trying to grow in this market by this percent over this this many basis points over this period of time. And then for there, like I think there's actually a pretty decent amount of flexibility in terms of how you get there. So it's like cool, like come up with theories for how you think you're going to be able to impact users in a particular submarket, or you're going to increase listening time is a big thing for Audible, or get people to have more listen more content. The thesis there is they'll buy more content, right? So we want people to buy our content. But beyond that, like there's a lot of flexibility in terms of like how do you achieve that? Well, obviously, if you're trying to get people to listen more, there's a lot of ways to do that. You could have you could add podcasts, you could add continuous listening, you could have better recommendations. Like there's no one path, and we're really free to kind of choose what that is. A lot of the role is collaboration with other groups. There's just so many different resources available. It's kind of overwhelming between market research and product marketing and content and the different tech teams. Like there's just so many people that you can work with. I think one of the big challenges I'm facing as a relatively new PM at Audible is just figuring out how much time do you spend collaborating with your peers, like across other organizations, and how much time do you spend heads down trying to figure out what you need to work on next, and kind of learning how to mine the data to kind of understand what the real problems are to build solutions. So yeah, that's I would probably say that, I don't know, that's hopefully like a little bit of a cross section of what we spend our time on. Not super exciting, frankly. Meetings is the answer, but the stuff that I enjoy the most is looking at the data. Large companies have enormous amounts of data on our customers, which is incredible to be able to sift through. And then being able to talk to really smart other people. So like I've never had a market researcher before. I had a conversation with our market research team for the first time last week. It's like, oh my gosh, like you've spent 10 years of your life becoming really good at market research. When I did market research at my startups, I just kind of Googled how to do market research for 15 minutes and sent out a survey. So it's like really nice to be able to have super deep domain experts that can kind of like bring their superpowers to bear to help you solve a problem. That is certainly a really great feeling, and not having to scrap everything together with like toothpaste and floss is also nice. What are the chances of being hired into a tech company, especially product roles with no tech experience, but experience in other industry product as well? I think what your question is here is like, what's your, I think that your chance of being hired into a tech company, if you say it's like Apple or like one of the FANGs, honestly, probably not very good, right? Like if you're trying to go directly into like one of the biggest tech companies in the world without any prior experience, like, yeah, like I think the odds are pretty long unless you go to like Harvard or MIT or Stanford. That being said, I think the odds of you go into like a growing Series A, Series B startup are probably pretty good if you position yourself well and you do the research and you kind of do your homework. I think the most important things are, again, like I said, showing curiosity, showing like, and there's a lot of open source stuff you can take. So take some Udacity courses on product management. Guess what? You can probably build some example products pretty much for free with stuff like Bubble, which is a no-code software solution. Write a blog where you kind of walk a business idea through validation process to see if an idea is good. And if you can't think of an idea, take another idea that you saw out in the market and like you kind of copy it and see if you can make a copycat version of it. I think that if you truly are interested in a role, especially a product role, in about 12 to 18 months, like with side projects, you could build a portfolio that would get you an entry-level product job. You just have to put the work in. And so I would encourage you, even if you're not starting a business, start doing some side. If you're in a role right now where you don't feel like you're developing the skill sets you need to be a product person, that's fine. If you can find a role that does, like, I think customer service, by the way, actually is a great role to be able to learn skills, because you can learn to talk to customers. Sales, like product is interesting because like there's no monopoly. I mean, probably more people come from engineering than any other role, but I don't think that actually prepares them better to be a good product manager than anything else. Actually, in some ways, I think they have a disadvantage because they don't have experience dealing with customers and understanding the pain. Yes, they know more about what's technically possible, but they don't know what they should be doing, if that makes sense, right? Like, whereas if you know what you should be doing, you don't know what's technically possible. Great, there's this entire function called technical program management who exists to help you get the engineers to do what you want to have happen. So yeah, I think you just need to build a roadmap for yourself, and things like this are probably a great place to start. You'd have a question on how to reach your hand. Just type it up, Abby, that would work. What are some PM tools, tech tools you can't do your job without? Recommended PM candidates to learn. That's interesting. I actually am a big fan of sticky notes. So like, I think if you are using a tool, how do I say this politely? Tools are great, but really you should have a process and a framework that works, and the tools should kind of conform to the framework. So like, Jira, Trello, Asana, they all work the same, right? If you have a way, like as long as you have a philosophy behind them, if you're leaning on the tools a crutch and you don't know how to work without how Jira tells you to set up a workflow, you're gonna have a really hard time. So I think the most important things are to add to your toolbox are add some learn about jobs to be done, learn how to do jobs interviews, learn how to do a kind of a fired customer, like a interview for a customer that fired you, learn how to do some wireframes in a tool like Figma, but like all that can be done in paper and pencil, and like the tools can just kind of help you do it faster. One tool I do think is good is Figma is a really great tool. I think a lot of product people, if you can, for better or worse, you need to communicate your ideas, and visually communicating your ideas is very helpful for product people. And not that you're a UX person, but like if you can kind of show a workflow of a prototype, that's very helpful. So I think that's something you should invest in, but no more so. I think the more important thing to invest in would be just equipping yourself with some really great fundamental frameworks in your mind for how people purchase stuff, why they purchase stuff, why they don't purchase stuff, and like kind of being able to give yourself those tools. is customer success the best route to go into product management? I don't think it's the best route. I just think it's actually pretty good, especially if you're a curious person. Customer success, especially in a B2B company, is great because your job is to you understand all the problems the customer has, right? Like literally people talk to you, they're probably not calling you to have like, hey, everything's going great. Like they're calling you because there's something wrong. And I think a good customer success rep, if you build a relationship with the product, you can be their source of really good insight on what's going on. And you can also learn if you have a good product team, they want to train you to learn how to like get the good insight from the customer. So it's not as good as if you're like, this app sucks. It's like, okay, why does this app suck? What specifically sucks about it? Okay, well, is it the pain? Is it too expensive? Does it not do the job? Like customer success is the one place where you just talk to customers all day, and therefore you can learn from customer problems all day. I actually, one of the first things I did when I joined Audible was ask, like, how can I sit down on some customer success calls? Like, I want to sit in the call center and understand what the complaints our users have are. And that voice of the customer is becoming a very popular. My daughter's crying for a snack. The voice of the customer is good. So is it the best place to go into product? I don't know. Like if I could go back to school, I would probably either study computer science or user experience. If I could go back in time, but you can't go back in time. You can only go forward in time. And so like, I don't think you should worry about like, where's the best. It's like, where are you today? And how can you if you want to get into product, how can you use that as a starting point to get to where you want to go? That's probably a better question. And I don't think there's any place where you couldn't become a product person. If you, again, like I said, it's not going to be tomorrow. It might be 12 months from now. But if you take 12 months and kind of start building your way there, I think there's a path to being an associate product manager or like an early stage product manager for anyone, assuming they build the right toolkit of skills. Are there any PM certificates that you would recommend for someone with little to no PM experience? I mean, I don't know, like this is a little bit biasing, but like I don't personally put a lot of stock into certificate programs for technology. I think a lot of them exist today. I mean, are money grabs, like, because like, I don't know. I felt the same way about project management, by the way. Like PMP certificates to me are like, okay, cool, like whatever. That doesn't mean there's nothing of value. I have not personally spent a lot of time investing in those resources. If I were going to spend $5,000 on product education, I would spend that on a lot of like courses. Like I would spend that on either some very targeted courses, like Harvard has a lot of courses or something like that are like with a very good professor. But frankly, I just read a lot of books. I would read some books, and if those books have authors that also do workshops, maybe do some workshops. I will say I did some stuff with a group called the Rewire Group they're actually based here in Ann Arbor, but now they're based out of Chicago, I think, that does some jobs to be done, specific training. That was helpful, but it wouldn't have been helpful if I wasn't at a point in my career. Like if I would have done that when I was early in my career, I think it would have been useless. I should have just read their book, which was like all of $12. So yeah, read a lot of books. That's what I would say. And then practice. Like I think invest that money in like, make a side project. Say, hey, I'm going to spend $5,000 over the next year to try to launch an app that like, it can be super simple, like a beer tracking, whatever it is, like come up with an idea, use that $5,000 to hire an offshore dev team or teach yourself how to use Bubble or pay for licenses for Figma or whatever you need to do to build yourself something that you can show as part of our portfolio. Because I think that's if I have a candidate who got a $5,000 certificate and a candidate who tried to build an app, guess which one I think is going to be better? I'm biased. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm going to go for the person who's built the app, but I think that's going to be more impressive for most hiring managers than just getting some shiny certificate. It's easier to get a certificate. That's certainly true, but it doesn't necessarily help you develop your skill set as much.
And I think we have time for one more question here. We're at the hour, and Abby's question is last. Abby, if you'd like to unmute yourself really quickly and ask the question, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just didn't want to interrupt you. My question was just more so related to like, what advice would you give for us like moving forward in terms of like developing our skills? Let's say we do have collaborative projects and we are able to like practice our PM skills that are mostly like soft skills. What is the best way to showcase that when we are meeting with an employer or someone that is a potential company to be hired at?
Yeah, I've said it a couple times now, so you probably can guess my answer.
Portfolio.
Like, I would start a side project and just even if it's not something that's like super, like you don't have to be something you're super passionate about, but just like try to build something. The build process, I don't mean code. That's actually the last thing you should do. Like this isn't a session on how to become a software engineer. If that's pretty easy, go to Udacity or go to Code Academy and start practicing. But the product side is like, identify a problem, talk to people to see if they have that problem, make blog posts about their problem, get people engaged in that problem, build some wireframes out, test those wireframes out with someone, like all that stuff that you can do just for time. Like everything I just mentioned there doesn't cost you a cent. You can just spend your nights and weekends doing it. And if you put that on your resume as like an item, like, hey, side project, Sean's app, and then bullet points, tested idea of app by talking to 75 customers and understanding key value proposition, built minimum viable product in PowerPoint with, clickable model and walk people through it, understood, like that type of thing is going to be so much more impactful for a potential hiring person, because you're showing, you're doing the job. You're saying like, look how much I want to do this job. I'm doing this job for fun, or I'm doing this job on the side. That's going to be super impactful to kind of show intent behind it. And then also by the way, now when you actually do get the job, you'll have already done it a little bit. You'll have kind of a framework to kind of build yourself on. I think one of the things this is my last thing and I'll get off my high horse, but like when I was younger, or when I was earlier in my career, because age doesn't have anything to do with it, I spent a lot of time thinking about like, I want to be a PM, I want to be a director, I want to start a company. And I didn't think about, I want to equip myself with the tools I need so that when I do this, I'll be successful. That is like, add tools to your toolbox. That's all that matters. You can't really control what you're going to do in your life to some degree. I mean, I'm not saying you have no control, but like, you can always control adding tools to your toolbox. You can always give yourself more skills. You can always give yourself more skill sets. And then once you have those skill sets, what you do with them, well, the more skills and tools you have, the more opportunity you have to use them in different ways. And so that's what I would be focused on, is like equipping yourself with the right tools towards a direction, right? Towards being a PM, but focus more on it's that whole journey versus destination thing is as always, right? But
Okay. So just the documentation part would just be on a resume and just linking it on there. I'm more so concerned about how to document it and make sure it gets transferred easily.
Squarespace is great. You can start a website for like $3 a month and document everything you do there. If you look at, I have a website, I'll share it here. I'm not ashamed to say I use Squarespace. Oh man, you can type Sean Seabright Jackson.
Awesome, thank you.
.com. Well, also
Great.
Tough being Sean Jackson. Not a lot of SEO. There's a football player out there who crushes me, so I got to add the middle name in there.
Awesome. SeanSeabrightJackson.com. Well, thank you so much, Sean, for sharing your story and your insights. I think you're so spot on pretty much everything you said, and I think you and I have similar biases, so maybe that's why that's the case. But to always I always kind of echo the same thing. The best way to get experience and to show employers that you can do the job is to just start doing it for yourself. And it doesn't have to be a business. It could be just a side project, like you said, and the investment can be very, very minimal. There's so many free apps and very cheap apps out there to do that you can use. But thanks again, Sean, for sharing your story, folks. Kristen just dropped the survey link in the chat. If you take just the 30 seconds, 1 minute it takes to fill out the survey to let us know what you liked about this event or what you would like to improve based on it, we would really appreciate it. And we will send you the recording for this event and any other event that we've had in the past that you would like a recording of. You can just go to school16.co/events and you'll see all the series there. Thanks again, Sean. Really appreciate you sharing your time. And thanks, folks, for the great questions. You can join us again next Wednesday at 6 p.m. for our next event. It's going to be with Michael Ferguson, who's a sales readiness lead at LinkedIn. And we're going to hear some great things from Michael as well. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.